So, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Glyn Hughes and Clare Harrison, who will be talking to us today about the secrets of successful learning. Glyn Hughes is Head of Assessment, Quality and Validity at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and Clare Harrison is Head of Curriculum at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So over to you, Glyn and Clare.
I'll unmute myself. Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's great to be here today to talk to you all. I'm Glyn. Welcome to our talk on the secrets of successful learning. Clare and I have worked here at Cambridge University Press and Assessment for quite a number of years, and we've spent most of that time working in the assessment part, working on exams, Cambridge English qualifications and teaching qualifications and other products within Cambridge Assessment English as we were. We've also, particularly in the last few years, worked extensively with publishing teams on curriculum planning and also working on integrating formative assessment into courses and thinking about how that might all work. We're not teachers, but we used to be. Before we joined the organization, we were both English language teachers and teacher trainers. So that's in our past, but I mean, for me, it feels like quite a long way in my past. So we're not here today to give you teaching tips or to tell you how things work in your classroom, because we don't know. That's not our area of expertise. What we're here to do, hopefully, is give you something to think about a little bit and reflect on, so that then you can take it away and think about how you might do things in your classroom as a result of the things that we've spoken about. So yeah, in the first part of the webinar, Claire's going to talk to you about some findings from research into educational neuroscience. Then in the second half, I'll be back to talk you through some implications for the language classroom of the things that Claire has spoken to you about. When I come back, I'll ask you to put comments, to put some stuff in the chat. I'll set you some tasks and ask you to put it in the chat. Also, we're going to ask you to think about some things. It might be useful to have a pen and paper to hand or something to jot down notes so that you can come back to them later. But if you don't have that, that's fine too. But just so you know, we're going to try and make it a little bit interactive rather than just talk at you for half an hour, because that's less fun for us and I think probably less fun for you. Okay, so with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Okay, thank you. So I should say before I start, I'm not an expert in educational neuroscience. I'm a former language teacher trainer, and I've learned about it for application to education. So what I say will certainly be a simplification of the science. And it's also worth bearing in mind that this is a relatively new field, although quite a lot of it's recognizable from educational psychology. But there needs to be much more connection between research findings about how we optimize learning following the science of how the brain works and actual classroom practice, and much more evidence from classrooms to support research findings. However, by talking about this today, we're hoping to bring teaching and what we know about the science of learning a little bit closer together. Okay, so to start off, we have 5 statements that I'll show you in a minute that we want you to think about, and think about whether you agree with them or not. Could you have a look at them when I show them and take a moment to think yes, no, maybe, and why you think that. And probably make a note for yourself of your answers, something like number 1, yes, number 2, no, and so on. We'll come back to these statements at the end of the webinar, which is why it's useful to have noted it down. So here are the 5 statements. I give you a short time to read them, think about your answers, and make a note. Okay, that always feels like the longest time to wait for when you can't see everybody. So I hope that was enough time to at least read through the questions. I'm going to move on now, but we'll come back to those later. Okay, so to start off with, what is learning? What does it mean to learn something? I mean, what do you think? What would be your definition in your head? This is what I've said. Learning is a permanent change in long-term memory. So it's not when we remember something temporarily, it's a permanent change in your brain that enables us to recall and use information in new situations. So it's not just calling something to mind, but it's also applying that knowledge to be able to do something in a range of contexts, not just the context that you first learned it in. And I think it's really helpful to keep this in mind when thinking about teaching or learning something new. In order to learn something new, you need to select the thing you want to learn from all the sights and sounds in the environment around you and pay close attention to it. And you have to process that thing in your working memory. Now, working memory is limited in two ways. It can't hold much information at once, maybe as little as 3 or 4 items, and it can't hold it for very long either, maybe 30 to 40 seconds. So it's limited in capacity and limited in time. It's like when you try to remember a phone number. If you keep repeating it until you use it, that's fine. But if you're interrupted and you have to pay attention to something else momentarily, you're likely to forget it. And most people wouldn't be able to remember it a week later. In order to be able to recall something a week later or any later date, the information has to be stored in the long-term memory. Long-term memory is like the warehouse or the library of the brain. And unlike working memory, long-term memory is unlimited in the amount of information it can hold and in the length of time that it can hold that information for. So it's like a permanent filing system where the information is held together in networks. Information gets into the long-term memory via a process called consolidation. This is a biological process of wiring the brain with the new information, which usually takes place while we sleep. It's probably why if you're trying to learn something like how to play a tune on the piano or remember some words in a foreign language, sleeping on it or having a break and coming back often makes it easier because some consolidation has happened while you were away. So in summary, a simplified explanation of how you learn something is you pay attention to it, you process it in your working memory, and then consolidate it in your long-term memory. However, it's only actually any use to you if you can retrieve it when you need it. We retrieve information by activating the network in the brain in which it's stored. So you can see the representation of a network in the brain here on the right. The information we want to retrieve is represented by the red square. And to get to it, we search in the network around it, activating those two and creating a pathway to the target information. And the more we activate the pathway, the stronger the connections become and the easier it is to retrieve the information. Information stored in the long-term memory can be said to have both retrieval strength, so how easy it is to get it out, and storage strength, that it's in there in the first place. So like a new phone number you repeat to yourself has good retrieval strength in the moment because you can remember it now. But if you need the same number again next week, the chances are you won't be able to remember it because it has low storage strength. So in other words, it doesn't make its way into your long-term memory at all, and it isn't stored there for future use. On the other hand, I'm sure you'll recognize the opposite situation as well. You know that you know a piece of information, the name of an actor, a band you used to like, a word in a foreign language. It's on the tip of your tongue. You know it's in there somewhere, but you just can't get it out. That piece of information has great storage strength. It's definitely stored in the brain somewhere, but it has poor retrieval strength, so you can't access it when you need it. And of course, what we want in learning is both good storage strength and good retrieval strength, so that our learners can retrieve the language they need whenever they need it. So how do we help with that? By building into lessons regular opportunities for what's called retrieval practice. So in other words, opportunities where learners have to retrieve something from long-term memory that they've previously learned. It's worth saying that obviously teachers and learners know already it's useful to review learning, so this is not really anything new. But I guess the findings we have from neuroscience indicate that some approaches might be better or more effective than others. So it's really about whether we can improve learners' memory by doing things slightly differently if we understand a bit more about how the brain works. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is this. So we're trying to interrupt the process of forgetting. Forgetting's natural, isn't it? We're all going to forget things. But if we really want to learn things and get them into long-term memory, we've got to somehow stop ourselves from forgetting. So how can we do that effectively? Well, first of all, research says that we mustn't make retrieval practice too easy. So we've seen that things that are easy to remember in the moment, like the phone number we've repeated, may not actually end up being stored in long-term memory at all. We can take a building analogy. So the sandcastle on the left is quick and easy to build, but it doesn't last. Whereas building a house with bricks is difficult and effortful. The results are not instant, but eventually we get a longer lasting building. High performance on something relatively easy leads to poorer long-term retention of the information, whereas something we struggle with a bit in the short term actually sticks better in long-term memory and leads to better learning in the end. So how do we make our retrieval practice more effortful so that learners remember information better? Well, we have two ways that we can do this. The first relates to how we schedule this retrieval practice, so when we do it. And the second to the way that this practice is carried out, so how we do it. In relation to when we do retrieval practice, research shows that if we space out practice rather than only doing it repeatedly immediately after we've learned something new, we actually remember the new information better in the long term. So the first to report this effect was a German experimental psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus, in 1885. And he was experimenting by learning nonsense words and observing how much he forgot over time. You may have seen this before. This is a graph called Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. And we can see from this how much of new learning is forgotten afterwards and how quickly. So as you can see from the graph, a lot of what we learn is really quickly lost over the course of even the first day of learning it. So by the end of the first day, we've only got a third left of what we've learned already. It's quite depressing, isn't it? And after 6 days, there's only a quarter left that we can retrieve. So what we want to do in learning and teaching is to schedule in some retrieval practice to interrupt the process of forgetting and to time that so that learners are challenged to remember. But this can feel uncomfortable for learners and teachers. It feels much more comfortable to practice a new topic a lot all at once. It gives us confidence that because we do well, because we haven't had a chance to forget anything yet. But ultimately, we're more likely to remember long term if there are longer gaps between the practices, because that way we have to make more effort to strengthen the neural pathway to get to the information. And as well as increasing challenge with the timing of retrieval practice, we can also increase the challenge in terms of how we encourage learners to do it. So if we take a look at this for a moment. So as is indicated here, research shows us that learners recall more, say a week later, when they've tested themselves, than when they review learning by more passive methods, by which I mean just like rereading their notes or highlighting things. And this is referred to as a testing effect. So the indication that learning's more effective following testing than following other methods is accounted for by the effort required to retrieve the information when doing a test or quiz, and also from the experience of making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. But studies show that learners don't expect testing to improve their memory as much as other methods. So to them, rereading the information or making notes while reading actually feels pretty effective. And I guess this is presumably because these methods give you a sense of familiarity with the information, even though they're not really helping with remembering. And of course, on the other hand, testing may make you feel like you don't know anything, and it's hard to recall things from long-term memory, and it's easy to make mistakes, and it doesn't make you feel very confident at first. And so learners think they're not learning as well via these methods, via testing, as via other methods. But actually, you don't retain as much in the long term from more passive methods, even if they feel effective, because you aren't having to make any effort to access the information in your own long-term memory. And testing yourself when you don't have the information in front of you, but you have to find it in your long-term memory, makes the neural pathways stronger. Here's that picture again, and ultimately leads to better learning. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Glyn now, who'll go on and talk about the more practical applications of this. Let me stop sharing. Over to you, Glyn. You're on mute, Glyn.
Yeah, thank you. Just give me a moment while I set things up here. There we go. It should be coming on now, and everything else on my screen has. So nearly there, nearly there. Get my notes back up. So, thank you, Claire, for telling us how important testing is. I will go straight in with a test. So do you remember Claire gave us a definition at the beginning of what learning is? Can you remember that definition? Can you take a minute? Don't put it in the chat just yet, but just write it down in front of you, or see if you can remember. How close can you get to the definition that Claire gave? Give you another few seconds. I'm getting some answers in the chat, which is okay. Okay, here we go. So, learning is a permanent change in long-term memory that enables us to recall and use information in new situations. So, I'd be interested to know how close you were. Just put it in the chat if you like. Which words did you remember? Which words didn't you remember? Are you thinking, oh, I wish I'd remembered that? Did you remember it all but using different words? I'm kind of curious to know, like which bits you think are the most important. So that's what it is. Learning is a permanent change, long-term memory, enables us to recall and use information in new situations. But that's not all that learning is. Claire also told us other things about learning. Learning is uncomfortable. It's about putting yourself up against the limits of what you know, and finding out finding out about what you don't know. That's an uncomfortable process, and actually it's more effective when we make it more uncomfortable, because we move people out of their comfort zone and mix it up and make it more uncomfortable by making it less easy. So it's also difficult. It's learning is best when it is effortful, when you have to put effort into it. So it's a hard thing to do. You need to, it's that thing about, well, actually just reading things over and over again doesn't work, even though that's the easiest thing to do. So learning is difficult. And of course, learning is time consuming. Learning a language, like learning lots of other complex things, takes time, takes repetition, takes building up vast, huge amounts of knowledge and skills in order to do that thing about being able to use things in new situations, recall and use in new situations. So at this point, I'd just like to say well done to all of you teachers who are on this call, who are putting yourselves in the middle of helping learners through an uncomfortable, difficult, and time-consuming process. I mean, it's like a really important and really difficult thing that you're trying to do. So, how do we help learners through an uncomfortable, difficult, and time-consuming process? What is it that makes learning more effective, given how hard it is? So I'm going to talk a little bit about Carol Dweck and her work on growth mindset, which you may be familiar with. There's a book there called Mindset, republished in 2017. And she talks about growth mindset. And she talks about having a fixed mindset against having a growth mindset. And the difference between the two things. So just have a think. What do you think is what do you think of the differences between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset? So I'll tell you. So someone with a fixed mindset is like this. I'll let you read it. So somebody with a fixed mindset basically thinks, well, my brain is what it is. It's not going to change. My brain is a fixed thing. I'm good at some things, I'm bad at other things. And I can't really change that. So I have my mindset about is fixed. And if that's what you think, it's no wonder you avoid challenges, because challenges basically show up for things that you don't know. And you give up easily because, well, what's the point? Because actually I'm not good at that. So there's no point in trying, because I'm not good at that. There's no point in putting an effort in. And actually, if people give me feedback, which they think is helpful, actually that's just criticism, because I can't do it. Can't they see that I can't do it? And if I see other people that are really good at stuff, that's annoying. That's threatening to me, because I see that I can't do those things. So I'm threatened by other people. In contrast, this is how Carol Dweck describes a growth mindset. Yes, as Angelina in the chat says, growth mindset is one's belief in your ability to learn. And if you think you can change, then all these things become true. You think, well, of course I'll embrace challenge because it's an opportunity to learn. You have persistence. You think, well, I'm going to keep trying because that's how I learn. Effort is necessary. You learn from feedback and from criticism, and other people's successes is an inspiration to you. And because you see it as something that you can aspire to as well, and that you can aim for. So which do we want in our classrooms? We want people with a growth mindset, don't we? We want people that embrace challenge and persist in obstacles and all of these things. So how do we do that? What are the things that you can do to develop a growth mindset in your class? And this is a moment where I think it's useful for you to put some stuff in the chat. So I'll give you a minute. What do you think helps to develop a growth mindset in your learners? And trying lots of new things, collaborate, let them make mistakes. Yeah, that's a great one. supportive, motivating environment. Thank you. Maria Casco, I think that's in Cyrillic. I'm not sure I can get to that one. Praising effort. Yeah, that's a really good one, Miriam. Thank you. Critical thinking questions, setting challenging questions, a formative approach from Pache. I don't know, apologies if I've pronounced encouraging. Collaboration. Yeah, positive feedback. Great stuff here. Yeah. Constructivism. Okay, that will make that another seminar, but thank you, Kisara. Strong and persistent. Ask smart questions. Yeah, great stuff. Loads of stuff coming in. Thank you. Being curious, critical thinking, all good stuff. Okay, I will show you some of the things that I wrote, which are some examples of things that might help in developing a growth mindset. So I think some people wrote praise learning and effort, not intelligence and success. So whether somebody's got something right or not, and don't praise how clever somebody is, but think about it as well done. You really I could see how hard you work to improve. Encourage collaborative learning and reflection. I think that came up there as well, because if you're learning from other people and learning from other people's strengths and then thinking about how learning took place, it came up, I think, in the chat. Fostering perseverance and resilience is really important. And one of the ways to do that is by is the power of the word yet. When you're looking at things that people can't do, think about it as yet. This is a thing that you're learning to do, and that if we carry on, then if you keep putting in the effort, you will get there. So you can't do it yet, but that's why we're here. And as has come up a lot in the chat, giving constructive, forward-looking feedback on the thinking about, okay, what can you do to get better? So thank you, and thank you for your comments. And there's an interesting comment about the things that can stop people from having a growth mindset. If people are overly critical about what you don't know, then actually it can be really hard. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at a few ways that course books and other tools can help to encourage a growth mindset as well. So things that you might look for in material that you're using. So first of all, here is a page from Think, Cambridge coursebook. This is the new edition that's coming out next year, and this is a reading activity, and rather like in that other slide, it talks about the power of yet, and it talks specifically and explicitly about developing a growth mindset. So it's a really interesting starting off point to be able to talk to your learners about growth mindset. So it's integrating talking about growth mindset into skills development, and this is quite a common part of course books and material that comes out from publishers, and it's really important, and looking for this kind of stuff and using it. And yes, there's reading comprehension questions, but then here there's also a speaking activity where people are encouraged to think about things they want to get better at and how they might do it, and how a growth mindset can help with that. And of course, you can move on to talk about how that might work with English language learning as well. Other things that might encourage a growth mindset. Are you familiar with Write and Improve? You can tell me in the chat if you are or are not. It's a great little tool that we have, that it's freely available online, and learners can go along, and then there's questions that they can answer. This is writing practice. They write in a text, they click submit, and probably between 1 or 2 seconds, they get feedback, and the feedback looks like this. Now, there's lots of things it doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you things about task achievement and effect on target reader, but what it does do is give you suggestions about how good your sentences are and things that might be mistakes. And it does it in a very safe environment where it's free from judgment. It's as free from judgment as it can be because it's a machine. So who's going to know? And it encourages learners to reflect, and what they can do. What's great about it is it encourages learner autonomy, because what the learner can do is they can look and they can change what's in what they've typed, and they can click submit again, and they can see if some of those things go away and if they've fixed it, and then if their overall score improves or not. So it's a really nice, it has a nice effect of taking the jeopardy out of making mistakes and seeing mistakes as a learning opportunity. So it's quite a nice little thing to encourage your learners to do, as it encourages drafting and thinking about and reflecting on mistakes and how to make things better. There's also lots of digital content that's around that gives feedback to learners. This one that I'm showing you is some experimental, some new content that we're looking at in Cambridge, that we're trying to think about, okay, how can we encourage learners to think about learning? How can we encourage good learning strategies, metacognition, as it were? So this is a listening activity. It looks quite straightforward. You listen to a thing and then you answer the question. But there's a few interesting things here. One is that you can change the speed of the recording. So if it's too hard, you can make it easier. So you can think about, okay, is actually is the thing I need to work on becoming better at understanding speech of a certain speed? And if you're preparing for an exam, that's quite a useful thing to know, because you can say, well, okay, if I've got this exam coming and I need to be able to understand speech at this particular speed, then it's something you can work on. So it's isolating bits and asking learners to reflect. And then it's also giving them feedback on if they get the question wrong. It's basically saying, okay, this is what you chose, this is why it's wrong. This is why it's a bit, you see, it's not quite what it says in the text, but then it's forward looking, because it gives you a learning tip, which is suggesting different ways to do it again. And then it's saying, let's try again. It's not the end of the world, you got it wrong, let's try again. And you see this actually in lots of good digital activities. So Cambridge Test and Train has it. I'm sure there's lots of other good digital, and it's about presenting feedback in a way that that encourages learners to learn and do more. And if you get it right, then you get told you get it right, but you still get a learning tip, because a learning tip is always useful. Okay, coming back to some of the stuff that Claire talked about encouraging recall. Have a quick look at this activity. This is a grammar practice activity from the new edition. Well, it's a test activity, so it's after a pair of units. So it might be something that learners studied a week or maybe 2 weeks ago. And this is a grammar test. I want you to imagine you are setting this for homework. So you're setting this for homework. How might you do it in a way that that will help to produce better learning outcomes, that will make learning more effortful and will help to improve recall strength for learners? So have a think about how might you do that. I'll just go, I know we don't have a huge amount of time left, so I'll just give you a minute to think about it. You can put stuff in the chat if you like, but I'll just let you think. Cartoon drawing. Okay, that's an interesting idea. I'd love to be in your classroom, Ilana. It sounds like a fun place to be. Okay, this is what I put. It's not a cartoon drawing. It's not quite as creative as that. What I thought was, okay, let's first of all basically say to them, look, you've got the student book there, but don't use it. Try and do it from memory. Make it harder for yourself. Don't look back at the rules and the explanation in the course book, but try and see if you get it right without looking back. So they are stimulating the parts of the brain that are needed for recall. Once you've done it, check your answers, but don't check your answers by looking at the answers. Check your answers by looking at what the student's book says, or the workbook says about the grammar rules, and make any changes. And then once you've done that, after that, look at your answers. So actually, the first time they do it, you're almost saying, actually, for this, it's okay actually not to get them all right first time. Let's try and do it in a way that will help to make it easier to remember next time. And that might involve actually doing it in a way that will make it harder and will make you get fewer right first time. And it means that this isn't a test where we're going to go away and like tell people this is how good you are at English. It's a test that's aimed at helping you to remember. So just to finish things off, we'll come back to the questions, and feel free to put your thoughts in the chat, and I'm just going to quickly talk through them, and then we'll go on to take a few questions. So the best learners make the fewest mistakes. I'm sure we all agree that that's not true. I'm going to be interested if people have a different view, but making mistakes is putting yourself at the edge of the things that you don't know, and trying things and taking risks. It's really important to be able to focus on one thing until my learners are comfortable with it before we move on. This is an interesting one because intuitively it feels right. It feels like I'm making my learners' lives easier. I'm helping them to focus. But there is research evidence that shows that switching between things and then switching back actually makes it harder, makes it more uncomfortable, and actually leads to better performance. So doing something for a bit, then doing something else, and then coming back to it, there's research evidence that actually helps for learning. And because it helps to stimulate recall and helps to build better connections to the information that you've stored. Frequent testing is bad for learning. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'd argue that that's not true. I think it really depends on what you use the tests for. If frequent testing is used to evaluate how good learners are and to tell parents about how they're doing in English, then that's probably not a good thing. But frequent testing as a way of encouraging learners to test themselves and to as Claire talked about, to make them try and remember the things that they've learned, then that can be really useful. So testing is a really important tool, but one that needs to be used carefully. It's important that learners do well in tests that are set. Again, no, not necessarily. Again, it depends on the purpose of the test. It's that difference between practice and performance. At the end of it, if they're doing a Cambridge English qualification and they've entered and they need that exam result for something, then yes, it's important that they do well in that test. But classroom tests, actually doing it in ways that means that first time round they don't necessarily do well, can have important benefits. And paying attention in class is the key to remembering what you've learned. You would say that yes, like if you're not paying attention in class, then then as Claire said, attention. If you don't have attention, you've got nothing else. So it is really important and is crucial, but it's not enough. You still need to do all of those other things afterwards. So I think that's it from me. I think I've left a few minutes for questions. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. I've been looking at them as I've been talking. And thank you very much for listening. I am going to stop talking now and hand over to Charlotte.
Thank you.
For questions.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much for a really brilliant session, Glyn and Claire. So we've got a few questions. So I'm going to dive into the questions that you've been putting into the Q&A box. And the first one, I think this is linked to motivation, actually. Teachers asked, what's the best way to engage students to test themselves without putting too much pressure on them? And I think that's linked to motivation. So maybe Glyn, could you answer that one?
So the best way to get learners to test themselves without putting too much pressure on them. I mean, I guess it's a lot of it is about the environment you create in your classroom. So the first one is to do it, and just do it and ask your learners to do it, and they don't even necessarily have to share their scores, not even with you. It's for them. And so test yourself, do it, see how well you did, and then do it again. So that takes some of the pressure off. But also, if they do want to show it to you, it's about creating an environment in your classroom where that's okay, and that sharing mistakes that you made, and sharing that you got questions wrong is good and is fine, and helps to create this mindset of we're all learning, we're all here to learn. If we didn't need to learn, we wouldn't be in this class. So it's fine, and it's good that you're making mistakes, because that's why we're here, so we can all get better together. So I think it's about the environment that's created.
And also, I was going to say about, I think you touched on this anyway, about talking about mistakes help you with learning, and telling learners the secrets that we're sort of sharing today, so that they know it too, and they understand that this is all contributing to them getting better.
Brilliant. Okay. Yes, got time for a couple more. So we've got another question here about how does a teacher develop growth mindset when you have a very introverted young student? So maybe come to you first on this one, Claire.
Well, I did see that one, and I was thinking it is a bit like what I was just saying for the last question. It's to do with talking about it and showing how this is helpful, and being, I think, with someone who is not confident, being very positive, and that whole, what Glyn was saying about you can't do it yet, but you will, and this is how we're going to do it. It is very important to trying to help to build that growth mindset for them.
Did you want to add anything, Glyn? Or
no, I think that's good. I mean, being introverted is interesting, and you can be introverted because you don't have confidence, but you can be introverted for lots of reasons. So I guess it's a question of understanding the cause of that introversion as well.
Great. Okay. We've got a couple more interesting ones. Now, this is an interesting one. Okay. Are there any particular brain structures that make students learn better? Who'd like to go with that one? That's a tricky one.
I don't know the answer to that, I'll be perfectly honest.
Yes, I think that's a tricky one.
I think I think as teachers, I think there are certain things that you can control, and certain things that you can use to help you, and certain things which are kind of outside the realm of what you can do things about, and maybe that's one of them.
Yes, I was just going to say, I think working memory is actually fixed, isn't it? As a thing, you can develop your working memory on a very particular task, but you can't develop it, I understand anyway, more generally. So in a way, that's something you can't change, but the way that you help yourself to remember things is something that you can act on.
Brilliant. Okay, this is probably our last one. So in schools, teachers are accountable for their learners' test results. It reflects badly on us if our students don't do well in tests. What would you advise? And who would like to go first? Glyn, maybe?
I can take that. It's a really interesting question, because I think it goes to the heart of a lot of the questions that we get about tests and about how accountability structures work in school. I think there is something about separating practice and performance, and there's something about saying, like, okay, as a school, there are things that sometimes we need to do where you kind of now's the job to, like, do all the revision, do your best, get it as right as you can. But there are other times when we're doing things that's kind of just for us. that we're doing in order to make learning, and this is really about learning. And it doesn't mean the first type where it's an accountability thing. You can still afterwards do lots of work looking at why learners got things wrong, and it can still be positive. But on top of that, it's like it doesn't, creating some space where it isn't always so high stakes for the teacher and for the learners is also, I think, really important.
Do you want to add anything, Claire? Or
no, that's perfect.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Okay. Well, that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. So thank you to Glyn and Claire for a brilliant session.